Bhagini Vyomavat Vyapta Dehaya Dakshinamurtai Namaha. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om Tat Sat. So we were doing the sutra number 18th, and that's over. Lokanandaha Samadhi Shukham. So this is about Vitarka Atmajnanam. So these are some sutras dealing with the ultimate realization of a sadhaka who has reached there. And in the verse number 18, we dealt with that particular state in which the sadhaka, all of us, when we are relating with the external reality, our attention is generally focused on external objects. So if we are, let's imagine, watching a football match or a rugby match or whatever you call it, we are not thinking about anything other than the football match, whatever we see, the characters, the movements, the score, etc. So our mind is generally lost in external objects and we are unaware of ourselves. Now, Lokanandaha, we had a discussion on it. There is Grahya and Grahaka. So, Loka, so Lokyate iti Loka Vastugramaha, the world of objects. Lokyate. Loka iti cha Loka Grahaka Vargaha. So, and then, this object and subject, both the aspects are there. Tasmin spurati sati pramatripada vishranti avadhanat tat chamatkaramaya ya anandaha etad eva asya samadhi sukham. So it's essentially it's mentioning about that continuous state of a meditative connectivity with the external world where you are all the time self-aware. You remember when we were discussing in the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna had asked this question, Sita Pragyasya ka bhasha. Please let us understand how this fellow gets into meditation. And when he's sitting in meditation, when he wakes up, how does he speak? How does he connect with others? Brajeta came, how does he move around? This is about the Vyuthana Dasa. Because when somebody is sitting in deep meditation, or we are in deep meditation, if a person, let's imagine, is giving you a lecture on aesthetics or ethics, which has to do with our everyday life, all the movements. And when he comes out of the classroom or he gets out of his meditative state, he enters into the external reality, his immediate reality, then suddenly, you know what replaces his cognitive process where he's thinking about truth, ethics, beauty, etc.? The habits, the sanskaras, the habitual ways in which his mind, his senses, his body, his mind, everything, they respond to and connect with the external reality. That is a normal human being. Even at a initial stage of progress, you will still have predominance of these habits and habitual responses. Then he starts cleaning the whole system and he sort of, refurbishes, so to say, and his responses tend to slowly change. But is the ultimate stage he's talking here, that particular sadhaka is all the time in that state of self-awareness. And he is not only looking at any object in the Vyuthana Dasa, but all the time aware of its relationship with his subjecthood. All the time, aware of that external object, but more importantly, aware of himself. We have discussed that earlier, how he verily looks at the whole world as Leela or game of Lord Shiva, and he sees himself as Shiva himself. He is no different. And we had also discussed, which is going to be the subject, the focus of the next sutra, that in that state, when he's that ultimate state, whatever he thinks happens, because he's no different from Lord Shiva at that ultimate level. Even slightly advanced sadhakas or siddhas, so to say, sometimes people go to them. And why they go to them? Because if you go to them, sometimes they bless you, sometimes you have some problem, you narrate before them. Even one kind glance can remove that difficulty from your lives. I mean, it has happened. A lot of people used to go. People would go to, say, Ramakrishna, or they'll go to many such saints, including Buddha, and they will get rid of it. There was one famous guy in Uttar Pradesh who was the Purnananda Giri Maharaj, who's the popularly known as Uriya Baba. He had run away from Puri, and there's a beautiful story about him. And a lot of people used to go and sit with him. He was not a very attractive looking fellow, but a lot of people have sort of noted in their experiences that many of their anxieties used to get removed once they reach him, because he used to be all the time in that Brahma Bhava, and he was a great devotee of Lord Krishna. So you have, and he mentions that if you have Kama Vasana, how do you get rid of it? He says, no, there's only one way, do Upasana. And then he says, if I have too much of anger and dvesha and anxiety, he says, no, if you do Mahatma Darshan and spend a little time, that gets neutralized. Because they sort of represent the pure spiritual energy in you, in all of us, because they are sort of standing very in close proximity with the absolute divine. And therefore, like Sri Aurobindo also, a lot of people have sort of noted down in their experiences. People used to go and a lot of their hidden questions used to get answered. This is the ultimate state he's mentioning. Lokananda eva samadhi sukam bhavati iti darshayati lokananda samadhi sukam lokananda padam loka shabdena ghatitam vartate lokyate iti lokaha loka iti lokaha iti vitpati dvayena loka shabda grahya grahaka rupam arthadvayam bodhayati. Grahya grahaka and grahya, what you see and the person who sees. Evam cha yasya anusandhanavata, and you are doing this analysis all the time. Yoga nishta purushasya cha. So he's saying, it is a chidatmani tattad rupena tadvayam spurati samanya dehadharinam grahya grahaka rupam jnanam eka rupatah jayate ayam ghatah tam aham janami iti. This is a pot and I know this. This is how generally we see. This is a beautiful sloka which will come. Ayam ghatah tam aham janami. This is a pot and I know this. Yoginam ayam vishesha vartate yadayu somananda padaha sivadrishtehe. So he mentions that, what he mentions, ghato madatmana vitti vedmyaham ja ghatatmana sada sivatmana vedmi sava vitti madatmana nana bhavei swamatmanam jana naste swayam shivaha. You have this duality of subject and object, but that particular level of sadhana, when a person is established there, he's beyond these dichotomies and all the time established in the self. And then therefore he's basic grahya grahaka sambiti samanya sarvadehinam yoginam to visheshoyam sambandhe savadhanata. You have that extra awareness all the time. So he is connecting with everything. All the time he's aware of his presence. It's not that I know this. You see, there is a word in philosophical intentionality. So when you have consciousness, there is something it's relating to. It's conscious of something. Okay. But there is a state in Vedanta, also ultimate pure consciousness. It is not consciousness of something. You are mindful, but you are not mindful of something. You have consciousness. This consciousness is not pointed on something, because when the consciousness is all pervading, universal and cosmic, and you realize that the whole universe is pure consciousness, what it has to be focused on? Is there anything outside of it? There cannot be anything outside of it. Look at it logically. It encompasses the whole universe that we can imagine of, and therefore that pure consciousness is without an object in mind. There's no object in focus. There's nothing to relate to. It's free from all relations, all entanglements. Therefore, he sort of is a very exalted state. Now, in the next thing, we are talking about what happens to the sadhaka who reaches there. We had discussed that a little when talking about the sixth chapter of the Bhagavad Gita with Gudhartha Deepika, where Pujya Madhusudana Saraswati had given us a long lecture, a long commentary on different steps in the meditative process as per the Yoga Sutras. So there is a state called Dharma Megha Samadhi. There is also a state where the yogi has a lot of Aishwarya, Sareshwarya, a lot of siddhis he gets. Anima, Laghima, he can be, he can just reduce himself to a very small size and escape, like Hanuman used to do. He's a great yogi. So he entered that particular demoness's mouth and suddenly escapes, expands, and goes away. So he used to play these games. So they can reduce their size, they can become micro mini in size, they can expand and become like a huge sky. You can assume these might appear very fantastic to a modern, rational, scientific mind, but then these are mentioned as certain spiritual powers which these people, through this method of sadhana, achieve. And we're going to discuss that in the verse number 19. Sakti sandhane sarirotpattihi. Sakti sandhane. You remember earlier this word Sakti sandhana has come. And we had discussed that when you do this Sakti Sandhana, this whole universe collapses, in the sense it doesn't continue to trouble you when you understand how this Sakti Chakra Sandhana, the word chakra extra was there. Sakti Chakra Sandhane Vishwa Sanghara. That was one of the sutras. You remember, we have already done it. Here he's saying Sakti Sandhane Sarirotpattihi. So you see, the word Sakti is kind of becoming central to this. Understanding the power of the Sakti is critical to overcome samsara, also to participate in samsara. The spiritual power is required to withdraw from samsara. We have to understand how it works on us. At the same time, this power also helps us to heal others, to create things, to effect positive, desirable change. Because if we are enlightened, we will not be concerned about this body, but definitely in the bodies of others, in lives of others. And that's how a lot of these siddhis, even though they are always looked down upon by the great masters, because these are pratibandhakas. They can delude us, they can distract us from the final goal of liberation. Nevertheless, many masters, from time to time, we have seen that, whether it's in Islam or in Christianity or in Hinduism, many of the spiritual masters have displayed some of these powers to help others, to alleviate a very disturbing situation in which somebody, who is trapped, they want to help somebody, they have helped. Now, let's look at the commentary on it and how that is being explained. Atha idrisasya asya yoginaha vibhuti yogam darshayati. This is the Siva Sutra Vimarshini. He's saying asya idrisasya asya yoginaha vibhuti yogam darshayati. What are these vibhutis? In the Kaivalya Pada, in Yoga Sutra also, there is a mention about how these great powers are achieved by the yogis. Ichha Saktir Uma Kumari. You remember the verse now, the sutra number 13. Ichha Saktir Uma Kumari. We had done this. This Kumari, Kridatmika, she plays around this world. And that Ichha Sakti, because you have Ichha Sakti, Jnana Sakti, and Kriya Sakti, but Ichha Sakti, willpower, is superior to Jnana Sakti, and Jnana Sakti is superior to Kriya Sakti. We had, there was a subtext in it. We had a bit of a digression and we had discussed this. So Ichha Sakti is superior to others, so Ichha Sakti, Uma Kumari, we had done the discussion there. How this everything can happen with the help of Ichha Sakti. And when the sadhaka is all the time meditating on this idea of the Parama Shiva, that means he is discarding his human identity, human attributes, his entanglement in his human nature to ascend to his real nature, which is Shiva nature. Today is Shankaracharya's Jayanti. So all the time he was saying, Nirvana Satakam, Shivoham Shivaham. Okay, I hope you're hearing me. So what all the time you are sort of staying in that divine self-consciousness, and then what happens? Lord Shiva says, whatever this yogi feels or wishes is going to happen because he's no different from me, because I have entered into his consciousness. Whatever that means, there are two ways to look at it. There's this German philosopher, Hegel, uh, and a very critical philosopher. He once made a statement: the ideal state is one in which humans shall be forced to be free. By obeying the ideal state, because that fulfills all their spiritual, material, social aspirations. By obeying it, they shall be free. A lot of people criticized him that he was anyway creating a condition for some kind of a dictatorship, and people thought Nazism kind of benefited from his ideas. But let's look at the philosophical aspect of it, pushing the political aspect out of it. When we are completely embracing the divinity, mark my words, this is a difficult thing, it's easy to talk about it. When we surrender 100% to the divine, which means we do not have any individuality in us. And how do we move? In the beginning, they say that there will be a game of duality in which you want to be closer to the Lord. You will practice that I want to be closer to the Lord, and I will do everything which will take me closer to the Lord or to the Divine Mother. And then there'll be a state in which you are no more different from the Supreme Divine Self. In that state, the individuality has become superfluous. But the body mind complex is a tool. It's a micro mini tool, is still active. The body mind complex is still there. At that state, that fellow has no individual will. Let's imagine theoretically and focus on it. It will become easier to grasp. So when it has lost its identity, it will have identity of what? It will have the identity of Paramashiva. It will have the identity because it has nothing of its own. Then that particular instrument or tool, which is still a human being, which is lying in front of the Supreme Lord, it starts imitating the Supreme Lord. It behaves like the Supreme Lord. It has nothing of its own. It behaves as if it's a clone of that Supreme Divine. It becomes a clone of that Supreme Divine because it has lost all its individuality. It's all desires and everything. At that state, he's forced to be the divine. That fellow, just think about it. In that state, we shall be forced to be divine, and again and again. Is somebody okay? Okay, so I don't know this. Okay, Someone by mistake is muting me. Make sure that I'm not muted. So then the critical thing is that we have no individual inclination, we have no individual affinities. And what happens then is that we are in that state. Whatever desire appears in us shall be the desire of God, because we don't exist anymore as individual human being. Another fellow may see us as a human being. Other human beings will continue to see us as human beings. But the sadhaka who ascends to that ultimate level of identity with Paramashiva, the Supreme Self, he loses his or her identity, and therefore that conscious machinery called this human being, which is there, will have nothing human as an individual. There is no individual desire, no individual likes or dislikes. However, from an outsider's perspective, he would look like a human being. When he suddenly gives a chocolate to an old lady, and there is a little girl, and he shouts at her, he say, "You don't study, don't come to me." Then he gives a chocolate to an old lady. A lot of people around him might think he is a very inconsiderate, cruel person, doesn't have basic sensitiveness to a little child, and didn't offer a chocolate to the child, shouted at her, and then he's rewarding a grown-up lady with a chocolate. Maybe because he likes that lady, because this lady is serving him, cooking food for him, so he's just trying to thank her. People might say that. But that fellow, at that moment, absolutely has no human emotion. It's quite possible that what he is seeing, we don't see. What we see, he doesn't see. And that's a very critical stage in which a lot of God men become confused by others. Others really misunderstand them. Here, we are talking about a state even higher. He is not, we are not only talking about his apparently erratic behavior because he is in a state of trance, like Thakur, while offering food to Mother Kali, the nephew of Mathur Sahab, he saw that actually he's eating the food himself. And he slapped him. "What are you doing? You are taking prasadam." But Mathur Sahab said, "You don't even understand where is he and what he's doing. Don't ever touch him." He understood that. Because at that moment, Thakur was Kali himself. But for an outsider, he was a human being. But he didn't have his human consciousness. He was feeding the mother. And he had no human consciousness, absolutely. And others didn't understand it. That mother was using his body to test that food through his mouth. But for outsiders, this is sacrilege, because you are trying to take food of the Divine Mother, which was supposed to be an offering. Now, this is a state in which he's saying that at that level of spiritual alignment with the Supreme Divine, he can even create different bodies. He becomes a creator. Can you imagine? He becomes a creator. How does that happen? He's saying, "Icha Sakti Ruma Kumari iti Sutrina ya asya Sakti Rukta." Of this yogi, the powers that we have talked about already. Sutra number 13. Tam eva yada anusandhate. When he starts meditating on that, he starts doing vichara. He does anusandhana. He's exploring it. Anusandhate dadhyena tanamayi bhavati. There are two words, dadhyata and tanamayata. First thing, you have a strong resolve, and then you become that. You don't think about anything. You have a strong, dedicated resolve to pursue it, and then you become that. There's nothing other than that. Tanmayata, tanmayi bhavati, tada, tadavasena asya. With the help of that power, asya, yatha abhimitam sariramu utpadyate. He can create different bodies. He can manifest anything he wants. Yad uktam Sri Mrityunjaya Bhattarake. So there is a mention, and he's quoting from another text. Tataha pravartate saktir lakshahina niramaya. Tataha pravartate saktir. Then that power manifests in him, which is not limited to creating any object. Like, you have the power to make halwa, you have the power to write a good poem, you have the power to participate in a shooting competition. No, it's not about any particular objective in mind. Niramaya is beyond that maya, that bondage, or niramaya, without any dosha, without any shortcomings, any limitations, any restrictions. Ichha satu vinirdishta, and that particular ichha sakti, jnana rupa kriyatmika. That Isha Shakti is being also takes the form, it can be Jnana Rupa, and it can be also, Kriyatmika. That is what is. Satu Vinirdishta Jnana Rupa Kriyatmika. Because anyways, we had discussed that in that sutra, that how Icha Shakti is superior to Jnana Shakti and Jnana Shakti is superior to Kriya Shakti. And therefore, it sort of unfolds itself. You're going to do anything without Jnana, and whatever you know is essentially triggered by, required by, inspired by, impelled by a powerful resolution of will. Without will, knowledge is superfluous. And you would not even like to know if you don't. And without knowledge, you cannot do anything. Iti upakramya, and finally is saying, sa yonihi sarvadevanam saktinam chapyanekadha Agni Shomatmika Yonis Tasyam Sarva Pravartate. Sa Yonihi. That Yoni is creative power. That causal power. That is the travesty of the Western translations of our Sanskrit texts. Yoni, they will translate that as vagina. Linga, they will translate as phallus. Yoni is Vishu Yoni, Lord Vishnu. Yoni is causal power. Sa Yonihi, what he is mentioning, Sarvadevanam Saktiram Chapi Anekadha. And that particular Icha Sakti is saying, in fact, is the causal energy behind all gods. Because who created all these gods and goddesses? Paramashiva, or you can call it Parameshwara. He creates these gods and goddesses, isn't it? Like, for example, if you look at the Devi Mahatmya, how Durga was created, all the gods and goddesses. And who are these gods and goddesses? You have the Parameshwara who creates all these gods. I mean, he takes all these forms. So, sa yonihi sarva devanam saktina cha api anekadha. You have different gods and goddesses, and they have different kind of powers. And that primordial, initial Icha Shakti, that Icha Shakti Uma Kumari, that is the source of all these divinities and all the powers in the universe that we can imagine of. And then he says, Agni Shomatmika Yonis. Agni Shomatmika. Agni is fire. Soma is the moon, sun and the moon, right? Fire and water. But it's not that stupid to translate that in literal terms. Here, Agni is for the masters, the commentators, stands for the Prana Shakti, and Soma stands for the Apana Shakti. Prana and Apana, both these Shaktis. Prana, Apana. Somatmika Yonhi Tasyam Sarva Pravartate. And everything sort of materializes because of these two energies. So the creative process with this principle of sun and the moon, and others will make different kind of interpretations of these two words. So, for example, in the Sambhavopaya, we are doing the Sambhavopaya meditative practice. This is the first chapter. Here you have Ananda and a Prakasha, right? So Surya will become Prakasha, and Ananda and the bliss, and the awareness, consciousness, and bliss. These are the different Agni and Soma. Soma will become Ananda, and that will become Prakasha Surya. In Saktopaya, that will be different. where, for example, Soma will become the Jnana Sakti, and in the Saktopaya, the Kriya Sakti, that will become Kriya Sakti, the Shurya. So Kriya Sakti and Jnana Sakti. So you can switch the meaning of this Agni and Soma, the principle of sun and the moon, as we put what kind of sadhana we are talking about. Sa yonihi sarvadevanam saktinam chapyanikadha agni somatmika yonistasyang sarva pravartate iti sakti sandhana mahatmyam Lakshmi Kaularnave. There is another text. So what is mentioned there? Na sandhanam bina diksha na siddhinam cha sadhanam. This Sakti Sandhana, that meditation is the critical, for anything. They will say, okay, so what are that critical factor for success? When you are doing strategic planning, you have a company, you are starting a project. What are you looking at? Different inputs are there. So you have staff, you have an organization, you have different departments, but you may not succeed. What they look at it, okay, we want to achieve success. So what is the most critical aspect of it? What is the key driver of success, as they say? That we need to master, to have it under our control, to move forward. That here is that Sakti Sandhana. Na Sandhanam Vina Diksha. If you don't have that meditative thing, if you are not doing that Sakti Sandhana, you will take a mantra Diksha. It's not going to give any result. And so there we all, in the sadhana, in the Kashmiri Saivism, there is a importance given to Diksha, Saktipata. The Guru hands over some energy, transfers some principles of sadhana and gives you some tips. But no sandhanam bina diksha. You might take diksha, not going to be fruitful. Na siddhinam cha sadhanam. And you want to achieve some perfection, and then you will do some practices. But do you have the primary thing, which is called the frame of mind? That is an orientation, a positive orientation towards that Shakti thing. So that is the central thing. When you are doing that Shakti Sandhana, you're going for Diksha, you're going for Siddhi, Sadhana, different kind of practices to getting Siddhi, fine, they will give you beer fruits. They'll fructify. But if you don't have that Sandhana, you don't have that Vimarsha Vichara, no, then not very useful. Na mantro mantra yuktisya na yoga karshanam tatha. And then you do a lot of mantra sadhana. No, you're not going to benefit. Okay. As it will come, and earlier we have discussed, the mantra and a mantri, they become one. What you are chanting and who you are. When you have that tadatmya, you are no different from that mantra. Then you benefit from the mantra. A lot of people chant mantras. And some people say, do you need bhakti to mantra, or without bhakti mantra works? The bhakta, the bhakti, the mantri, the mantra, everything actually get jumbled up into one pure consciousness and a bundle of consciousness. It gives very quick result. He's saying, na mantro mantra yuktischa, na yoga akarshanam tatha. And then obviously the other things, yoga akarshana. No, you will not move forward. You will not achieve much. It's kind of alerting us there. Ityadina pratipaditam. So here, in these couple of slokas and certain slokas that are quoted here, the emphasis is being laid on Sakti Sandhana, that Vicharatmaka sadhana. Then he's saying that when a person is able to do that, what happens? When we are actually being able to meditate like that, what happens is mentioning yathecha vyartito dhata. Dhata here is Lord Shiva, Paramashiva. And then, it's like you're propitiating him. And when you propitiate him and he's happy, what happens? Jagroto arthan hridi sthitan. And he wakes up. Where? In our hearts. We are invoking him. he rises in our heart, in our consciousness. He manifests in our consciousness, and then Soma Suryodayam Kritva, and then he sort of, you know, he makes the principles of sun and moon blossom in you. These energies, prana and apana, they blossom in you. Kritva sampadayati dehinaha. This yogi, whatever you want to do, he's saying that once you're established in that, then it's very easy. So what happens is that Lord Shiva himself sort of enters into you. Okay, the Shiva, he sort of enters into you, and he accomplishes all your desires, because he sort of enters into your heart of the yogi, the sadhaka, and then he becomes the cause of the emergence. Sun and the moon, these principles rise in you, which means that these unique principles of creation, these forces of creation, it fructifies in you. So this feeling of prakasha and ananda, that is sambhavopaya. Surya is prakasha and ananda is soma, the moon principle. Prana and apana, the flow of these two energies. Okay, and then he's saying that depending on where you are having this, that you're being sort of, there are different ways in which this is being made sense of, that prana apana, when you have that minimal, that kriyatmaka anavopaya for the lower level, the initial, the beginner sadhakas. Mid-level sadhaka saktopaya is saying that sun and the moon, they will be jnana sakti, and you have the kriya sakti. So soma is jnana sakti and surya is your kriya sakti. And then sambhavopaya, you have that prakasha and a vimarsha. Vimarsha is that ananda or vimarsha, that vichara, and prakasa, that truthfulness. That is what is mentioned. So all that is being mentioned here, and we'll just look at the last commentaries a little. Sampradam asya yoginaha animadi ashteswaryena yatheshta nirmana vilakshana vailakshana sampadana saktim darsayati iti sakti sandhane sharirutpattihi. So, even in the Yoga Sutras, there was a mention of this. There was a brief mention of this. I'm just trying to look at that particular sentence. The sutra that is there in the Nirmana Chittani Asmita Matram, that is there in the Kaivalya Pada 4, that's sutra number 4. Nirmana Chittani Asmita Matram. So, you can create a lot of things, and these things happen. Okay. So, Yadatu Yogi Bahun Kayan Nirnimite. So, they can create, this is a little fantastic for a person who is not into that. If suddenly someone mentions that you can get these powers, but there is mention in the texts that sometimes a yogi at that high level of spiritual siddhi and sadhana, he can assume 3-4 bodies at the same time. So he can be in his ashram. At the same time, he could be doing tirtha yatra, or he may be, if he finds that one of his relatives is very ill in the hospital and desperate to see him, he would be in his meditation. He would not go anywhere, but he can physically send out an image which will go, and the presence of his physical presence, the appearance itself, will be a source of peace for that fellow who is about to pass away. Something is, is in a terminal illness. He might appear, and later on people think that he just had an illusion, but he can do that. So they can have this kaya nirmana, they can have. So that is what he's mentioned. Now, how do we take this particular sutra, Sakti Sandhane Sharirutpattihi, for our sadhana? I mean, it can be very exciting because it is mentioning about some kind of a power. Because there are different ways to look at it. You can say this is Tutiparaka, or you can say, like Swami Vivekananda, when he's commenting on the in his Raja Yoga, the royal path, while commenting on the Yoga Sutras, he says that a lot of people who are not so spiritual may get attracted to the science of yoga, thinking that they're going to cultivate a lot of powers. And he says that one has to be very careful because you do not know what these powers will do to you. So the least interesting side of it would be to actually fantasize that we would like to have a few powers like that. On the other hand, the real spiritual intent of this sutra for me is that if you are in fact opening yourself up uh, to the divine to the extent possible, whatever things we find it impossible to achieve humanly, because we have this human frame, a lot of things we can, a lot of things we cannot. But once we open our system completely to the divine, then what will happen through this system will be unimaginably far better than what we, with our energies, with our money, with our resources, can achieve. So, to me, that sort of would inspire us to sort of become more meditative and more connected with the divine and have that powerful devotion and that meditation, because that is the key. That key is that Sakti Sandhana, that Ichha Sakti Uma Kumari. So this whole sadhana that we are talking about, the key thing is in fact to open ourselves, our consciousness, to the absolute divine, and then the magic starts happening, and we don't have to make it happen. And with that, I'll stop here today. Any questions? We have time. Any questions anybody has? No questions. Okay. So we'll do the Santi mantras. Om Purnamadaha Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vasishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Sri Guru Namaha. Thank you. See you on Thursday.